Well, hello there! After one of my recent videos where I adapted this little crazy Helios lens to my GFX 100 Mark II, a few of you reached out to me and wanted to know more about it. Well, I'm no expert on them, but if you'll join me for a few minutes, I'll tell you what you need to know to start using them in your photography. So let's go! Welcome! If you're new here, my name is Jan Malmgren. I'm a Swedish photographer, ecologist and writer. This YouTube channel is all about my interest in photography, sharing my knowledge and my photos with you folks. Sometimes it's technical and sometimes it's philosophical. If that sounds good to you, please help me building this community by giving me a thumbs up and most importantly, by subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to ring the bell so you'll stay in tune with all the updates. Well, back to the Helios lens then. What is it and why is it all hyped up? Let me tell you what I know about it. The Helios brand of lenses was produced in Russia between 1958 and into the early 1990s. As I understand it, they were made in at least 3 different factories, could be more. The Helios lenses have become legendary, but they were initially a rip-off based on the fabulous Carl Zeiss Biotar optical formula. However, as time progressed and they were mass-produced, the quality of materials and assembly deteriorated. This made them very prone to artifacts, and in the age of digital mirrorless cameras, they developed a cult following for being easy to adapt and for their distinctive swirly bokeh effect. Most notably, they are quite sharp in the center of the image and quickly fall off into softness towards the edges. They were also heavily affected by flaring, which results in soft images with low contrast. And therein lies the secret to their popularity, well, or even hype, among photographers wanting to experiment with a more vintage film or cinematic look, both for stills and video. And that's also what caught my attention to this lens when I was looking for something that could help me replicate the vintage look of large format film cameras of the old days. The Helios lenses were usually supplied with C-nit cameras and can still be found in flea markets where they used to be common. In other regions, they can be bought online, but since many photographers have understood that they are quite useful, they have become more and more difficult to find and the prices have gone up. The most sought after Helios is the original Helios 44, which has a 58mm focal length and is f2 at its widest aperture, fully open. It had an M39 mount and had 13 aperture blades, which gave them a very pleasant bokeh with quite flattering bokeh balls. It looked a bit like this, the original Helios. This is actually the 44-2, but it has this chrome finish. So it's a bit older than the ones you usually find. Anyway, in 1967, the follow-up Helios 44-2 was introduced. It had compromises in build quality already then. It featured an M42 mount and had only 8 aperture blades. The bokeh is still pleasant and swirly, but the bokeh balls were more cat's eye-like, if you will. And these lenses usually looked something like this when they were mass-produced. Even later in the production of various Helios lenses, the aperture blades even came down to only 6. This was the model that was called 44M7. If we take the Helios 44-2 as an example, like the one we have here, it uses the M42 screw mount, so you'll need an adapter for your camera system. They are quite inexpensive and widely available. You just screw on the adapter on this lens mount and then put it on your camera. Here I have the adapter for M42 to GFX. So just put the lens and the adapter and screw it on. There. So now you have the adapter onto the lens, like this. And then also you can just put it on your camera. I'll bring up my GFX 100 Mark II here. I don't know if you can see it, but here it is. And then you just put on the adapter like any ordinary lens, switch it on, and then you have the Helios lens adapted to your, in this case, medium format digital camera. In some cameras, you need to make a setting in the camera's menu or switch to electronic shutter in order to make this work. The Helios lens has one quite interesting feature. You could call it a preset aperture or an aperture limiter, and that's what makes it a bit different from most other lenses. So if you look at this lens here, I'll try to put it as close as possible to see if we can get the focus on it. It has a lot of reflections. But here in the back part is the focus ring. It's very smooth with a bit of a resistance. And then the second ring here, the thin one, is the aperture ring. And on top here you have what I call the focus limiter. So it's a little red dot on the front ring there, and then you can adjust this ring and set it to the minimal aperture opening that you want to use during a shoot, for example. So now it's set to 16. Can you see it there? The red dot is over 16. Therefore, this ring here switches all the way from f2 to f16. So you have all the aperture settings to choose from during a shoot. And if you see in here, you can actually see the aperture closing down to f16 and open up to its full opening here at f2. But if you, during a shoot, want to just have it set to sort of a very small range, for example, from f2 to 5.6, then you just change this outermost ring and set the red dot to f.6. See if we can see it there. See the red dot is now over the 5.6 mark. And then this ring here, the aperture ring now, is limited. It's between 5.6 to 2.0. So it closes down to 5.6 and opens up to f2. And of course, many photographers who use this lens adapted to their cameras, they just want to use it at f2, you know, having it fully open to get that swirly bokeh. So then you just set this aperture limiter to 2, f2. See if you can see it there. The red dot is over 2. And now this ring below here is cannot move, or move very, very slightly. And that's because the aperture is now locked at f2, fully open. So that's quite an interesting feature and actually very useful during a shoot when you want to determine before you start shooting what kind of aperture range you want to use when you're in the shoot. And of course, when you use these lenses on your digital mirrorless cameras today, you don't have any autofocus, of course. These are manual focus lenses only. And you need to know that you will have to work manually also with the exposure values. So for example, on a mirrorless camera with electronic viewfinder or live view, you can just skip some of this fuss. Set the aperture where you want it and compose the image. And since you're seeing the actual exposure in real time, if you activate the exposure preview on your camera, everything is really easy to work with. And it's fully manual focus, so you'll be turning the focus ring yourself. So a tip is also to use focus peaking or even magnification to nail the focus. This is especially important when you're shooting wide open at f2. The depth of field is really razor thin. The focusing ring turns with a nice resistance. The metal on the barrel of the lens feels really good in the hands. So when shooting with Helios lenses adapted to your digital mirrorless camera, set your camera to aperture priority, for example, or entirely to manual mode. Actually, manual mode is quite the best way to go, in my opinion. Since there is no electronic communication between the lens and the camera, it won't know what aperture you set. So, for example, when you're shooting in aperture priority mode, the camera meters through the lens and adjusts the shutter speed automatically. If you're doing it all in manual mode, you control both the aperture and shutter, and you use the light meter or histogram as a guide. And if you want to get that swirly bokeh, there's something you need to know. The famous swirly bokeh effect is best when you're shooting wide open at f2 or perhaps f2.8. You stop down a bit. When your motif or subject is relatively close to the camera, and when you place the subject with a distance from the background. Also, if you have, for example, trees or bushes in the background, the swirly effect will be more notable. And the subject, of course, should be centered in the frame. The swirl happens because the bokeh circles become more elliptical toward the edges of the lens. And it's most pronounced with the right subject to background distance. So you need to experiment to find the sweet spot. And that's quite an interesting way to make photos. It's not a quick way. You have to be very slow and intentional and know what to look for. But when you find the magic, it rewards you by producing some very interesting photographs. And also, if you like this slow and intentional approach to your photography, you will be very well rewarded. It is not entirely easy to come by a good pre-owned or used example of the Helios lens. But if you do, these are the strengths and shortcomings you need to be aware of. Buy from a trusted source, and preferably from one who has restored and cleaned the lens from any oily residues or even fungus. These lenses are old and they may have been left or kept very badly, and sometimes they have both corrosion and fungi on the glass elements inside the lens. And that is very difficult to remove by yourself. You need to be quite good with picking these lenses apart and cleaning every element up. But the pros with these lenses is that they are still quite affordable. They have become more expensive, but you can find lenses for quite a reasonable cost. But you need to be aware that there are lenses with a lot of problems. If you find the good one, then you will be rewarded by this swirly bokeh, the magic, which is beloved by portrait and fine art photographers and also videographers. It's reasonably sharp in the center, don't expect miracles, and it's easy to adapt these lenses to modern mirrorless cameras via M39 or M42 adapters. You should know when you buy a Helios lens that there is a great deal of variation between the copies, actually a wild mix between good and bad copies. These lenses were produced during a long time, and the modern lenses had poorer quality and were assembled more poorly than the earlier ones. The corners and sides of the frame are nowhere near the sharpness of the center, which is actually what you want when you are looking for that swirly bokeh effect and, you know, the softness that progresses out from the center, which is sharper. Mechanical problems are common. Aperture sticking, oil on blades, falling aperture blades, and focus ring issues. Those are the most common problems that you can run into when you're buying a Helios lens. Also, there are over 50 different versions that exist of these lenses, and identification is extremely difficult sometimes. Something to be aware of too is that the early versions used non-standard filter threads. So if you're planning on using filters like ND filters or anything, it may become difficult for you to find a filter threading that fits the lens. But who are these lenses for anyway? Well, they have acquired quite the following, and there are so many videos out there on YouTube, so why should I produce yet another one? You can just search in YouTube and look for these lenses. But if you're into portrait photography, you want a certain look, then these lenses are quite amazing. If you're doing fine art photography, seeking distinctive rendering or vintage looks, like the one I do with this project where I shoot in black and white, old buildings, etc. If you do video work, you know, the swirly bokeh translates beautifully to motion. And also anyone actually wanting some character over clinical perfection, you get that instant vintage look straight out of camera. You don't have to use film simulations, but you can, and then it will look perhaps even more vintage, of course. You should also be aware of that these lenses takes a lot of patience and experimentation. They're not for photographers seeking technical precision. These lenses can be used for those who really value unique optical signatures and vintage charm. So in my personal collection, I have acquired 3 Helios lenses. I showed you this one, the shiny one, the chrome Helios, which I believe is quite early. It's not one of the earliest, but quite early. It was made in the KMZ factory. It's a Helios 44-2, and that means it's a 58mm f2.0 lens. I also acquired this one quite cheaply here just the other year. This is a late production Helios 44-2, also with a 58mm focal length and fully open at f2.0. This one is poorer in quality, it's a bit loose, and it has oily residues on the aperture blades. So it's not really a good copy, but it's quite fun to have. It's in really good condition on the outside anyway. So it will stay in my collection, and perhaps I will get it restored sometime in the future. And then, of course, I have the one that I am most proud of, the one that I used in the video where I showed my project of the Swedish Midwest. This is the Helios 44-2 58mm focal length f2.0, and it was made by a Hungarian guy who runs this photoblog, Hispan's photoblog. I'll leave a link in the description below. He has a lot of material and he produces these kinds of lenses and also projector lenses that he restores, picks apart, cleans up, and makes all kinds of weird effects, and he paints them and removes the paint sometime. And he's quite a character in this lens world. So I bought this little Helios of him a few years ago. He calls this one the red flare monster, and you can see why. It is painted red inside this barrel here in front of the front lens, front element here of the lens. And if you're shooting into the sun or you have a lens flare here, the lens flare will be colored red, and you get a warmer or reddish look if you're shooting in color. And I actually think that this is a really nice look on this lens. It's quite amazing, and I wish more lenses could look like this with a brushed aluminium or metal look. So this is my precious. Anyway, it's quite fun to use, and it's also cleaned up really nicely. So this has no traces of fungi on the lens elements, and it is very clean, no oil on the aperture blades, for example. So really a good copy. He has a lot of this stuff for sale, and if you follow that link in the description, you can see the work that he does. And also I'll put on a video, I think he posted the video on TikTok a number of years ago, showing when he actually restored this one, where he took off the color, the paint, and did the brushing of the steel, and also did the paint job on this lens before I bought it. So it is quite very well documented. So it's a lovely lens, and it has some really good character. And with his permission, I will also post a few of the photos that he made with this lens before sending them to me. And if you're interested, of course, I have this episode where I show you when I use this lens shooting black and white mainly, portraiting or documenting old houses, old abandoned houses here in the Swedish Midwest. And it's really a good lens for that kind of character. So anyway, that's the story of my 3 little Helios lenses. So, well, toys for the photography nerd. So what do you think? Is adapting these kinds of lenses something for you? I'd love to hear your comments down below. I read and reply to each and every one of them. And if you're not following this channel already, please subscribe, ring the bell, like this video and all that stuff. It means a lot to a small creator and a small channel like this one. You can also check out some of the other videos I have made so far. So that's all folks. Have yourself a great day and see you in the next one. Bye bye!